Hey everyone, it is Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026, and this is an update on what is going on with Iran. Never a dull moment. And so let's have a look at the headlines. So let's start with President Trump. That's always a good place to start. And here's what he had to say.
We have ships heading to Iran right now, big ones, biggest and the best. And we have talks going on with Iran. We'll see how it all works out.
Yeah, we got big ships. We got talks going on. We'll see how it all works out. And Iran told the U.S. it's ready to suspend its nuclear program, apparently, in those negotiations. There are apparently negotiations going on, and they've said that they're willing to suspend their nuclear program, but it will continue to develop their ballistic missiles, according to the New York Times. And to calm the situation, Iran is willing to shut down or suspend its nuclear program, considered a major concession. But it would prefer a proposal that the United States made last year to create a regional consortium to produce nuclear power, two Iranian officials tell the New York Times. Secretary of Iran's National Security Council, Ali Larijani, had met in recent days with Vladimir Putin of Russia with a message from Iran's supreme leader that Iran could agree to ship its enriched uranium to Russia. Okay, now let's talk about this for a moment. What's so wrong? Let's allow an international consortium to create nuclear power. After all, Iran claims that its nuclear program is only for civilian use. So let's first of all talk about that. Let's put that to rest because it is an absolute lie. Let me explain. Iran has vast natural gas reserves and very cheap electricity already. Yes, it does. It has a terrible grid. It has terrible infrastructure. But the problem is not cost of electricity. So a costly nuclear program makes no sense if the goal is just to get power. This was outlined in a fantastic article done months and months ago by Daniel Greenfield. He's a Shillman Fellow at the Horowitz Freedom Center. You can look it up at Front Page Magazine. And he goes on to explain there that Tehran, the Iranian regime, has lost about $1 trillion as a result of sanctions because of their nuclear program, because they stick to it. And that is completely irrational. If the goal is to save some money on electricity, they're losing way more in the sanctions than they would gain. Now, let's remember, they are an oil-producing nation. Why are they lacking in energy? Why do they need nuclear power? They're one of the biggest oil-producing nations in the world. If the issue is that they don't have good refineries and they don't have a good infrastructure to get their oil turned into the gas that they need to provide energy for their people, it's way cheaper to produce that infrastructure than it is to suffer $1 trillion in sanctions because you have a nuclear program that you claim is to produce energy. Again, when you are pumping oil every day. So nuclear energy, in fact, in Iran only contributes a tiny fraction of Iran's electrical grid. The nuclear program is not about domestic energy needs. Another evidence of that is that the facilities that were bombed by the U.S., by the B-2 bombers in the famous attack back in the 12-Day War, Operation Midnight Hammer, Natanz and Fordo, they're built deep, deep, deep underground. That is so complicated and so expensive to do. Why would you build these nuclear facilities deep, deep, deep underground if they were for benign civilian purposes? They're obviously to protect potential weapons-related activities from attack. That's why you build them deep underground. Look, Iran disguises its military objectives behind this civilian facade of needing nuclear energy. And what they're doing now in the negotiations by saying that they're willing to suspend the program, but not the ballistic missiles, what they're trying to do, and really what these friendly Arab governments are trying to do, is just delay tactics. They know that Trump is not going to be in power forever. And they want to go back to the way things were before, whether it was the Republicans or the Democrats before Trump. They just went about their business, moving forward on their nuclear program. And then they had all these nice negotiations with the Obama administration. Let's go a little further into this negotiation issue, by the way. So Ynet really pulled together a lot of the different stories. There's a big story in the Wall Street Journal, a big story in the New York Times. And what we see here is that there is going to be talks. There are going to be talks next week that will be held in Turkey, apparently. And Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are going to be involved in this. And President Masoud Pezeshkian said that he has authorized preparations for negotiations following requests from friendly governments in the region to respond to a proposal by U.S. President Donald Trump. Okay, and he wants these to be fair and just negotiations. That's what he wants, and not to be done under threat. Now, the most important section of this piece here says as follows. Take a look. One official said that the discussions could be divided into two tracks, one focused on Iran's nuclear program and another addressing a broader set of issues, including U.S. demands for limits on Iran's missile program. Major differences remain, particularly over uranium enrichment and Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Despite those gaps, both Trump and Iran's leadership have expressed a willingness in recent days to talk, opening what officials describe as a narrow diplomatic window. That comes as the United States continues to position forces in the region and as Trump has warned of a possible strike if negotiations collapse. Obstacles remain significant. Iran has told regional mediators it is prepared to discuss only its nuclear program, while the United States is pressing for wider talks that would also include restrictions on Iran's missile program and its support for allied groups across the Middle East. That's the proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. Tehran continues to reject key U.S. demands on the nuclear issue, including halting the production of enriched uranium and surrendering existing stockpiles. Arab mediators said Iran fears Washington may be using diplomacy to buy time ahead of a military attack. Okay, in recent days, regional countries have launched an intensified diplomatic effort to avert war. Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, made an unannounced visit to Tehran on Saturday, and Egyptian President Al-Sisi also spoke with the Iranian president. And they've and they now have this proposal drafted by Oman and Qatar. Look, let's pull back the camera for a second and talk about what we are actually seeing here. Okay, the Arab countries in the region, none of them are democracies. None of them have freedom. They play nice with the West and make deals with the West, but they're not really pro-West. I've said this before. The last thing they want is the Iranian regime to fall. What? Don't they hate the Iranian regime? Of course they hate the Iranian regime, but they don't want it to fall. They want it to be weak, but they don't want it to fall, because if it falls, the Iranian people are not like the people in their countries, in Saudi Arabia, in Syria, in Egypt, in all these Arab countries, these Muslim countries. The people are overwhelmingly Muslim, Islamic, and there's all kinds of Islamic factions, and they hate the West. The Iranian people are pro-Western. They're secular. They're educated. The last thing that these Middle Eastern despotic kingdoms need is a free, democratic, Western-style, oil-producing, massive nation in the middle of the Middle East, which they would see as a potential destabilization of their own countries, because we'd have a country moving away from Islam, moving towards the West. There'd be freedoms, there'd be prosperity shortly after, and also strategically, they would become far less important to the West than they are now. The reason the West needs all these countries is because you want to have a foothold. You want to have some people you can work with in the Middle East. Iran is the largest landmass in the Middle East. It's a very potentially wealthy country because of all the resources. And if it would become a pro-Western democracy with its 90 million inhabitants, it's the largest, most significant country in the region. It would undermine their entire structure, all these little kingdoms where there's no democracy. It would undermine them. They don't want the Iranian regime to fall. That is what we are seeing here, folks. That is why they are so frantically trying to keep the regime afloat. So what we're going to have next week is you're going to have these talks where you're going to have Witkoff and Kushner, who are always appeasing, and they're always saying, "Oh, everyone just wants to live a better life." We call Witkoff naive Steve here in Israel now, and they're going to get together and they're going to try to convince President Trump. There's going to be a full court press: the Turks, the Egyptians, the Saudis. Everyone is going to be pressuring the Qataris, especially. They're going to be pressuring the United States, pressuring Trump not to attack, and saying there's a more peaceful way to do this, and we'll get them to stop the nuclear program, and we'll make some concessions, and it'll be very similar to, oh, we're going to get Hamas to disarm. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. Well, no one really wants a war. We don't want escalation, and that all sounds very nice. The problem is that this leaves the evil regime in power, and the fact that the regime wants to go back to what they were negotiating back in June, that was before they murdered tens of thousands of their own people. So I don't know how this is going to work out. Can I say for sure that President Trump is going to hold firm and we are going to bring down the regime? I can't say that. I don't know. No one knows what's going to happen except him. I talked about that in one of my earlier videos, that President Trump is deliberately unpredictable. It's something that he said going all the way back to his first campaign. I played a clip of that there. But things are still quite tense. And in the end of the day, if President Trump does not come to the aid of the Iranian people, it will go down in history as a terrible betrayal after what he said. So that's always hanging over all of these negotiations and all of these talks. But bear in mind, as much as the Shiites and the Sunnis hate each other, as much as the Iranian regime has terrorized the other Arab countries in the region, don't be fooled. They don't want the Iranian regime to fall. They want it to stay in power. They'd like it to be weak. They're fine with it being weak, but they do not want the Iranian regime to fall. So we're going to continue to watch this very closely. Please keep watching, keep sharing. Thank you so much, all of you who are watching, for the growth of this channel. Please share to everyone if you find these videos helpful. And please make sure to check out all the great video content that we're putting up at the Israel 365 YouTube channel. God bless.